analysis, and right in between, and there were supposedly big stone things that came down at one time, and right in between I found the resonant point of the Great Pyramid. And I measured the thing and found out it was 8 hertz. Acoustic resonance. I think it would reverberate. And if ever any of you have been in a Great Pyramid, the daytime is like being in a railroad station. It's noisy, every echo amplifies, rebounds, and so on. But at night it's so quiet you can hear an airplane going overhead through all that thick stone. So anyway, when it resonated, it's like a big violin resonant chamber resonating. I mean, really, it was quite an experience to be in the stuff. So then I had to calculate how this could be a resonant frequency for the Earth's magnetic field, you know, the 7.82 hertz. And I worked that all out in terms of when the resonance occurred, the crystal lining, you know, the granite lining would flex, and that would cause a minute magnetic field, and that would... So that was one experience. The other experience was at the same time, since I was up from 6 at night, 6 in the morning, I had to sleep during the daytime. And I found out that it was more convenient to sleep by the side of the pool than to be in this hot little cabin room. And stupidly, I'd fall asleep in the sun, and when I get really sunburned, which I did in this case, skin comes off of me in sheets. I don't know, some of you may have this experience. It just peels off. But I kept wondering why, after the 3rd day, this stuff wasn't just coming off me in big sheets like alligator skin. And so I was in the pyramid night after night after night, and this stuff never came off, first time in my life. So I left, finished my job there, and I went to Athens to do some work at the Parthenon. And God, I wasn't in Athens but 6 hours when I began to peel. I mean, layer after layer. I looked like a snake, you know. So anyway, I found out, you know, by reasoning and biochemistry and so on, that being exposed to this 8 hertz resonance in the Great Pyramid, that it was a health-giving thing, which I subsequently proved in cancer and other ways, and it kept my skin cells alive. They didn't die from the ultraviolet and the burn and the exposure, right? So that was a very big lesson to me.
Yeah, but they did slough off.
Huh?
But they did slough off when you stopped.
Oh, it did slough off, but as long as I was in the Great Pyramid, nothing sloughed off. But when I left, I didn't have the daily therapy. See, that was the point. Didn't have the daily 8 hertz saving my skin, but as soon as I went away, I just like an old mummy. I began to fall
yeah,
apart.
But in other words, though, if you suffered from a trauma, sensation of some kind, and you say had an oscillating Hertzian thing with you, it'd be sort of like a pacemaker. If you shut it off, you know, I mean, all this stuff is right there.
Well, this was like that. It was keeping this stuff alive, just as though you kept something fresh in the refrigerator, and you took it out, and, you know, it rots. Anyway, the interesting thing. Now, the third thing about that question is, I then got very much involved with the whole pyramid system around the world. I went to Mexico and I studied that Great Pyramid with Hugh Harrelson as a great expert. I went to China to study the Great Pyramid system there. By this time I had portable, sophisticated ELF equipment. And I found out that in every Chinese pyramid, there's a kind of a temple platform in front of each pyramid. And when I measured the ELF field there, it was 8 hertz. If I moved 20 feet away, or even on the pyramid, I got all the local 50-cycle junk from the power line. So I finally worked out a theory that these pyramids built around the world were used to stabilize the 7.82 Earth resonance. And these people knew whenever they built all these things, we still don't know when the Great Pyramid was built, they were able to manage the ecology of the plant by managing one simple frequency. So anyway, that's the whole thing about that. There's a lot more to it. Now, what was your third question, sir?
Philadelphia experiment.
Oh, Philadelphia experiment.
And I just remembered the 4th one.
You know, Tesla died January 6, 1943. He died in his bed in the New York hotel. Immediately thereafter, a maid came in hours later and found out he was dead. And they called the FBI and the police and blah, blah, blah. Well, the point is that Tesla had given annual interviews to New York Times, New York Herald Tribune on his birthday about a new weapon this and a space shield and all kind of talking Star Wars stuff in those days, in the 20s and 30s. And I have some of his private correspondence. He actually offered these defense weapons to the United States, to Canada, to Great Britain, and he wanted like $7 million or something to build a whole goddamn thing to have a shield against any invading aircraft or rocket or whatever. And everybody thought he was nuts. He was talking to artillery people in the government, literally. They had no idea what this was all about. So when he died, though, we were in the middle of a war, right, 1943. The FBI took all of his documents, and the reason I know this is years later I was asked by his executor, which is his nephew, who was the ambassador, Yugoslav ambassador to Washington, to try to get back the papers from the government of Tesla. And we worked at it for 2 years, and they used me because I could talk the lingo of these idiots in the government. And we got the stuff, and it was all shipped back and put in a museum in Belgrade. But the government, and I know the guy who was in charge, I know the 2 FBI guys who are still alive, believe it or not, and they gave me some of the papers that they stole themselves. They said, I like this paper. No. So that was saved. Somebody, I know the guy who was the director of the Philadelphia experiment, secret, nobody ever found out who he is. And somebody decided that some of Tesla's technology, in other words, if you had, in those days they had big coils, bigger than this thing, all stuck on the side of the ship, hanging like little life jacket things, you know, what do you call them, lifesaver. And Tesla had worked out a method that by putting a magnetic field through these coils that you could neutralize the Earth's magnetic field exactly, and therefore the enemy, at that time the German submarines who had magnetic detectors, couldn't locate the ship by magnetic detection, called target invisibility. So the Navy started this experiment in October of 43. In other words, just enough time to steal a document, get a program going. Took an old ship in a Navy yard that already had Gaussian coils, and they, you know, had all the measuring equipment around. Somebody threw the switch to energize the coils, and what happened surprised everybody to this day. The ship suddenly disappeared from its moorings in Philadelphia, showed up and was witnessed in Norfolk, which is about 300 miles south, and then popped back into its original berth, and about 200 men aboard, and they all went cuckoo. Some of them were mentally ill the rest of their lives, hospitalized. I know some of the men who survived and what they experienced. So that's what the Philadelphia experiment was about. Being in the middle of the war, nobody had time to try to figure out what had happened and to repeat the thing. As far as I know, the Navy never, I mean, they tried, but they never really mounted a full-scale effort after that to try to find out what really happened with that Philadelphia experiment. So that, in a nutshell, is none of this stuff is in the book you read, right?
No.
No. You won't find it.
What do you think of?
Oh, there are... Tesla discovered ways of making objects disappear. This we know. I know a guy who was from DuPont who was in charge of Navy battery construction and testing. And what they found out, they'd have batteries as big as this thing to run for submarines. That's what they did. And they had certain requirements that they had to, when they threw the switch and shorted out the 2 poles of the battery, all the plates and the electrodes and everything had to withstand the surge of 100,000 amperes. That's an awful lot of juice, right? So they would short this thing. You know, it was all set up in a way that nobody could get hurt. And they found out if there was a wrench left in a room or some piece of metal, it would suddenly vanish. Now this is ordinary workers, DC batteries and so on. Now Tesla did the same, and they found out that metal would levitate and a lot of other things, but the main thing was vanishing. The man is alive, and he's a very reliable witness, top DuPont official. So anyway, there's another thing that Tesla did that nobody ever understood. he took 3 Tesla coils and placed them upright in a triangle